Welcome to Ujima Wednesdays. September is all about race and taxes. This week, we're joined by Marie-Frances Rivera, president at the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center. Marie-Frances is leading MassBudget at a time when the people of Massachusetts are reimagining ways to achieve truly equitable and inclusive economy and society. Her experience guiding powerful and multidisciplinary teams around a collective vision and action is transforming the organization and policy discussions in Massachusetts. Under her leadership, the organization continues to build bridges and partnerships with community leaders, elected officials, labor and business leaders to ensure state policy helps achieve equitable outcomes for all. Marie-Frances, a native of New Bedford, Massachusetts, woot woot, I'm from Southern Mass too, and Afro-Boricua descent, joined MassBudget in 2014. She earned her master's degree in law and public policy from Northeastern University and has a bachelor's degree in business management from Babson College. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to get started and chat with you. Welcome, Marie. I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Nia, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here with you all. And thanks to all. And can you just let me know what my time is for my portion, just so I right size?
Till like 7:15. So
okay.
Yes.
So I have a little deck to share with you all, but I'm hoping, since we're a pretty small group, to keep it conversational, ask whatever clarifying question, no questions too big, no questions too small. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my organization, MassBudget, in case you're not familiar. I know that last week, which I don't know who attended, but I think you started talking about taxes. Anyone wants to bring in from that conversation, I'm sure was super interesting. So please do. And hopefully I can share some things that you're not familiar with about taxes in Massachusetts, and kind of what's going on, and a little bit of the context and how we can all work together to shift the system to make it more equitable. So I'm going to do a little screen sharing. So just give me 1 second. And hi also to Sabrina, who I've done work with before. Okay. I usually work with a double screen, but I just finished doing a presentation. So I'm out in Worcester and I only have my one screen. So, all right. Can everybody see this so far? I'm going to expand it out so you guys can see the whole thing. Okay. Y'all can see thumbs up. Okay, great. And I'm going to expand this out so I can see most of you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so just by a raise of hands, are folks familiar, or virtual hands, with the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center? Have you heard of us before? No worries if you haven't. Okay, cool. I just like to know. So MassBudget, I've been at the organization for about 8 years. I've been president of the organization for about 3. Whoop, whoop. I've got, like I said, we just finished facilitating a session. So I have a 1-person audience member out here as well. Beth Wong from the voter table. So MassBudget, this is our 35th year. Actually, we started out as the Tax Equity Alliance for Massachusetts back in the 80s, pushing back against some tax cuts that were really going to dig into the amount of funding that our schools had, the other essential services. Jim Browdy and some others were some of the founders of the organization at that time. And over the years, MassBudget became more of a think tank. So still kept we want to advocate on behalf of low-income communities. We want to advocate on behalf of communities of color, make sure the resources that they have are really meeting the needs, right? But also then became really skilled, and we have amazing analysts who do research and policy analysis on the state budget, on taxes, on economic policies here. So that's a little bit about MassBudget. I'll talk a little bit more, but what I'm going to focus on today is really our work on tax equity and our belief really that tax justice and making our tax system more equitable equals racial justice. And so again, that's our team. Some of our team anyway, we're a leading think tank focused on advancing equitable policy solutions to create a thriving Commonwealth. Some of our folks. And a little bit about the way that we frame things out. This was developed, a few years ago with our strategic plan. Around this, the way that we frame our work is we look at the state budget, we look at taxes, but we have a goal, we have a mission, and our mission is really to see the state budget, which is fueled by taxes, right? To see our state budget, it's a $50 billion annual, the biggest piece of policy that moves through the Massachusetts State House every year, to see it actually create anti-racist outcomes in the Commonwealth. And so part of the way that we do our work is we partner with folks, and we love to deepen our partnership with Ujima. Plug. We've talked about that. So that folks can really help inform this concept of an anti-racist budget and really what it means for their communities. So that's one thing. Tax justice work, equaling racial justice, economic security, and really inclusive democracy, which what it means for us is making sure that all of this information is accessible to people so that people can really be civically engaged, push your elected officials, et cetera, and really be deeply involved in decision making. So taxes. So just by kind of a raise of hands, there's sort of the saying that Massachusetts is Taxachusetts. Like, is that sort of kind of where we're starting off the conversation, where people really feel like Massachusetts is a place with very, very high taxes, this moniker of Taxachusetts? Is that where we're entering the conversation today? Kind of, is that part of your guiding belief around taxes in Massachusetts? Yay or nay? I see Karen and Louise still on my screen. And feel free to unmute. Feel free to jump in.
And I don't know if you can see the chat, Marie-Frances, probably not.
Oh, I can't. Yep.
Okay. Yes,
But I'm gonna. Yep, I'll try to get the chat into.
Oh,
yep,
yeah,
nay.
and I'll read it aloud for you. Sierra said Mass actually has lower taxes than where she lives now, which is New York. And I said no.
Okay, great. Yep. So, yep, Karen.
When I lived in Atlanta for 15 years, I paid higher taxes in Atlanta and for the state of Georgia than I pay here in Massachusetts. It was a blessing to be here. Also, one of my best friends when I was living in Alabama, her nephew came to actually live with them. And because food and clothing were taxed so heavily in that state, he literally quit college and moved back to Massachusetts. So I'm nowhere near property taxes on a house that's worth 2 or 3 times what my house was when I lived in Atlanta. So I'm happy to be here just for the taxes.
Wow, that is super interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And thanks, Sierra. And I will try my best to keep the chat up. But if not, if people can just let me know if there's something I should see in it. But okay, then this next slide will resonate with you, because there is sort of this moniker out there that Massachusetts is this very high tax state. But actually, if you look at all of our state and local taxes combined, we're right around average, right around the US average. So you can see the different states, see if some of what you mentioned around Georgia pans out. Can't see them all, but yeah, it actually is. It's on the lower side. Yes, Louise, you have your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about the taxes in these times, in the September-October issue. they had a thing called a left answer to inflation. Because I have to admit, we used to say taxes was a the price of living in a civilized society. And I grew up and it came to age in the 60s where there were more taxes paid. And this article goes by that things like rent control, price control, could control inflation. And they say by taxing the rich. It's saying because Friedman and them say they blame government spending for causing the inflation. But they say a lot of the profits, they like landlords will raise prices what they can get, not the cost.
Yeah,
In that article, it's something I recommend. It sort of suggests like they had the American poison, and when they voted for tax cuts and everything, now the middle and service cuts, and now the middle class can't afford college. And this is saying you invest in these things, like after the WPA, after Franklin Roosevelt, and all that. And that was all taken away. And that helped boost the economy. And that's what they're saying. Get away from that and look at that. Because the way this is saying now is screw the poor, have people unemployed, and that's the way to.
Exactly. Exactly. I would love to see that article, and we've done a lot of research too, and we have one publication specifically that I can think of that kind of outlines the changes in the economy, the changes in wages over time, and the changes in public investments, and really how that has dramatically shifted our economy to where we're at, especially in Massachusetts, with extremely high levels of income inequality and chronically under-resourced schools, transit, you name it. So that definitely resonates with me. So yep, we're around average, and click to my next slide. And we're average, but as you can imagine, not a surprise to anybody, lower income people end up, paying more in state and local taxes as part of their income than wealthier people for many reasons. One is that wealthy folks benefit from a number of different tax loopholes and are constantly, in the time that I've been doing this work over a decade, pretty consistent in pushing various loopholes, at least the ones I keep track of on the state level. And also like lower income people, much of the reason why their income is more taxed is because they're spending their income on things that are just more highly taxed, either with the sales tax or with other kind of consumption taxes and things of that nature. So our tax system currently in Massachusetts is pretty upside down. There are some states that are worse. Washington State is pretty bad as well, but ours is pretty unequal, and it mirrors a lot of state and local tax systems across the country.
Yeah.
And so what we see, and the folks that spoke last week might have spoken to this, but in terms of the data that we have on race and ethnicity of people who pay taxes, because the IRS doesn't ask for that information, we have to develop other sort of methodologies to get to it. We work really closely with the Institute for Tax and Economic Policy. I'm actually on their board, and they're the ones that actually help us generate a lot of these incident reports, or who pays taxes. And so they were the ones that actually developed this, and they're working to improve their model, which is really great, but it's still tough to really pinpoint how much people pay by race. But this is our closest approximation, is looking at the different income groups and then saying, okay, since there are in lower income groups, more Black folks, more Latinx folks, et cetera, then we know that they likely are paying more of their income in state and local taxes. So that's the best that we have so far. I wish we had more accurate data, but it just is where we're at this point, but there are other scholars who are, approaching this question of, how are Black folks, how are people of color disproportionately taxed in ways that are really interesting to like Dorothy Brown and things like sort of what are the taxes that we as people of color, we as Black folks are incurring that maybe white folks and other folks with privilege are not. So, but this is Massachusetts, the best Massachusetts modeling we're able to do. Yeah, Karen, you have a question.
Yes. What's the contribution of the local part of the taxes in this disparity? I'm wondering if maybe larger taxes in a place like Boston, as opposed to one of the more rural areas of the state, or maybe out farther west, if that has a greater influence, if it's the swing in the local taxes.
Yeah, I was trying to dig it up for this too, because I figured you guys would ask some detailed questions. I'd have to look into that, because the local property tax, I'm not sure exactly how much of the local property tax makes up like this thing, for instance, for
Yeah.
lower income folks.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling they might not be able to, even in the model, get to the granularity around particular counties or but that's a really good question. So kind of how it falls geographically.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a great answer to that. And anybody else or anybody on that point? Okay. So in Massachusetts, like I said, Massachusetts is about average compared to the nation in state and local taxes. And part of the reason why we're there is because we've had some pretty major tax cuts over the past decades, cuts to the personal income tax in Massachusetts that was voted on by voters, cuts to taxes that are more geared toward wealthy folks, like capital incomes, tax rates and dividend tax rates. So, we every year try to update what the impact of some of those longstanding tax cuts are to our state budget. And so the latest figures that we have when we combine all of those different tax cuts is that current today, if we hadn't have had those tax cuts, we would have approximately $4.15 billion additionally each year to go to schools, to go to fixing our transit systems, to go to investments in affordable housing. And we really like to paint that picture because it really does give us context to many of the disinvestments that we're seeing across the state. So one thing that we've been doing a lot of research around for many years is how can you increase taxes in a way that doesn't disproportionately tax low-income people and makes the tax system more fair. So we've written multiple reports. One report that we wrote a couple years back were 14 different options on raising revenue in progressive ways. They included corporate tax, increase on corporate taxes, increases on dividend, increases on capital gains, et cetera. And one tax that we've focused on for a long time that is actually going to be on the ballot in November in Massachusetts is the Fair Share Amendment. So I'm going to talk for a minute about the Fair Share Amendment that's going to be on the ballot in November. So essentially the language is a little bit in summary form here at the bottom, but essentially what the Fair Share Amendment would do is that it would add an additional 4% tax on income that a household makes above $1 million. So your first dollar over $1 million would be taxed at 9%. The estimates on how much that would raise for the Commonwealth annually range from about $1.5 billion to upwards of $2 billion. And the money would be allocated to education and transportation. So the modeling that we've done around the Fair Share Amendment and what it would do to the upside down nature of our tax system is essentially it would bring folks in the top 1%, obviously would increase how much they paid in taxes, but they would still be, less than, even people in the middle or the bottom half of the income distribution. So that's a little, I don't know if you guys have questions about that, but we've been publishing a lot of research about who this would hit, who it would not hit, would it hit homeowners, how does it impact small businesses, to answer some of those questions that we're hearing from the public about it. To the next page. And I don't know how much you guys have been tracking tax policy in Massachusetts in the past year, 6 months. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. But since January of this past year, there have been a lot of debates between Governor Baker, between the legislature around permanent and one-time tax rebates and tax cuts. And it's been, and I work with people, I've been doing this work for about a decade. I work with people who have been doing this work for 2 decades plus. And they say that this is one of the biggest moments for tax policy in Massachusetts. Like the amount of money we're talking about, the sort of proposed structural changes to tax policy in Massachusetts are pretty serious. So I'll give you just a little story of what's happened since January. The governor proposed upwards of $700 million of tax cuts to our budget, which is pretty significant, some of which would have been permanent and really geared toward very high income people in Massachusetts. Cuts to the estate tax were proposed, additional cuts to capital gains were proposed. The legislature took a while to respond and waited till the very end of the legislative session to respond. And they responded by increasing the amount of tax cuts, making them slightly more equitable. But then there was a last minute bomb that was thrown. It was pretty crazy if you were paying attention. And it was, you might have read about this in the newspaper, but it was this 40-year-old law that the voters approved that was triggered because the wages and salaries of the people of the Commonwealth, the amount of revenue that we were bringing in the state was outpacing that. So this law that had been on the books for 35 years was now triggered. And so all of the talks about shifting our tax code were kind of thrown out the window. And now the conversation is about the $3 billion at this point that needs to be returned in a very short period of time to the taxpayers. And so we've, this was a very sort of hidden law that nobody had paid attention to since the 80s. And now we're starting to do analysis on it. And what we're starting to find out is that this proposed change is very inequitable on many levels. It's inequitable because, let me just see my next slide. I'll get to that. It's inequitable because of the way that it wages and salaries are actually configured. It leaves out a lot of income that wealthy people actually make off of investment income and things of that nature. And also the way that the money, the $3 billion that the auditor has actually certified needs to go back to the taxpayers would be distributed in quite an inequitable way. So you see here, this is our kind of latest number crunching on this, that a majority of the money from this law and the way that it's configured now would go to very wealthy households in Massachusetts. So, there's a lot happening around tax debates, and unfortunately, there aren't that many people paying attention. We wish more folks were, and that's why we do things like this. Because at the end of the day, it's the people's money, and we should really all have a say in the ways that it's redistributed to people and the ways that we invest it into the public good. So wanted to make sure to bring this to y'all's attention. And you see here this like a pie chart of how it's distributed. So I didn't have too much more. I don't want to load you all with information. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm happy to share more about taxes. Happy to talk about my cat, whatever.
Another question.
Yeah.
Was this tax cap law intended to have this type of disparity?
So it was the campaign was pushed by Citizens for Limited Taxation, from my understanding. I'm sure other people who, which is one of the tax cut kind of groups. And there were people who are either at my organization, sort of partner organizations that at the time, I believe they waged a lawsuit against the question because they knew it wasn't equitable, but it was sort of on some kind of technical ground about the money not being distributed it couldn't be distributed as cash. It needed to be distributed as a credit. I guess that's what they felt like they had the possibility of winning at the time. But it was pretty conservative far-right groups that worded the question. So, yeah. And it was only triggered once before the year after the law was passed. And we have analysis on why we think it was triggered now. We've gotten in Massachusetts over $100 billion in federal aid in different ways, either through the Paycheck Protection Program, other ways that it's gone directly into people's pockets, to state and to local governments. And so that's increased the amount of revenue, and the way that people earn money is slightly different now too, the ways that people are getting money. So wages and salaries aren't growing. Wages and salaries are growing, but people are also making more through investment income as well. That's not included in the calculation. So
Okay.
Part of the conversation can we reform this thing? Can we reform the calculations so that it's more equitable? And that's work we're going to look into it. But also our legislators are going to, they're the ones that would have to initiate a process to actually reform this thing or repeal it.
Well, that investment income portion that explains a lot of this, because it's hard for people middle class and towards the lower end of the pay scale to generate wealth. It's all spent on living and existing. And so that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
So
and then the mechanisms for giving people back the money are through income taxes, which and the way that it's a flat rate, it's there are a lot of inequities in the way these things are calculated.
Yeah. Pardon me for asking so many questions, but my
Please do.
my CPA geek is coming out right
Oh,
now.
good. Oh, good. We love CPAs.
I find this very interesting.
Just to let you know, Sabrina wrote a comment in the chat.
Thank you.
And I don't know if you want to just go ahead and read it out loud, Sabrina.
Yeah, no problem. So I was just saying how it's crazy, just the information Because I've seen the post about the repayment, and most of the majority of my immediate circle is online in real life. We're just kind of grateful to get some money back. But yet when we look at kind of like the inequities and really like how is it being distributed, how is it being, cut up, it's not readily information that's out there, and it kind of makes the repayment just look a little different with that lens. And I just appreciate the fact that you bring this up. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of spin when I read about this in the news too, or kind of glossing by certain details. So, we as quickly as possible tried to get this analysis, so that we really understood it and we were able to share it out. And when I saw it, I was just like, and even in addition to this, some of the other tax rebates that were being talked about, sort of during the summertime, that the governor was proposing, that some of the legislators were proposing, left poor people out. It was, it's been really interesting to watch how these conversations roll out and the information that's shared with the public about some of these initiatives too. So I appreciate you being interested.
And okay, you got it, Sierra. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Sierra's gonna read them out loud.
For sure. So Ruth says, what is the timeline for legislature to change the formula, given they are adjourned until next January?
Correct. That's what we're trying to figure out. So yes, they're adjourned. They're in informal session. Technically, they can move things through, but if any one legislator opposes it, then they can't, which this is pretty controversial. It's about taxes. So we thought that perhaps we'd have more time, but the governor has really been fast tracking the timeline on this. So the auditor approved, they basically approved this to go through. They said, okay, governor and your team, you're right, we need to pay this money back to the taxpayers. And the latest that I've heard in the news is that by November, mid-November, after final tax collections in October are like approved and come in, that checks and rebates are going to go back out to people.
Wow.
So
Oh, wow.
It's
This is shocking.
it's a difficult and the fact that there isn't an organized community of people really understanding what's happening with taxes and what's happening with some of these pieces of legislation. It's hard to watch, and it's work that I try to do with partners, is to try and build a bigger community of folks that really understand and are organizing around these issues, because they're so intertwined with housing issues. It's so intertwined with schools. It's so intertwined with transit, investments, and small businesses, whatever it may be. But this time around, it almost is what it is, which is pretty tough.
Did the Fair Share Amendment come out of this realization of disparity?
So I've been, this is like such candid talk. This is going to be published somewhere. Okay.
You can edit it out if you'd like. If there's a section that you don't necessarily want to be shared, we can edit it out.
Okay. So what I will say is that the Fair Share Amendment, or sort of, raising taxes on upper income people, there have been so many iterations of campaigns about this from what I can remember from the Deval Patrick days. There were campaigns around this, but the Fair Share Amendment, the sort of change to the Constitution that would add the 4% surcharge on income over $1 million, that particular campaign did come out of a recognition that things were underfunded, that there were inequities. And I want to say, was it around 2014 or maybe 2015 that the first iteration of the Fair Share campaign started. And it's a pretty lengthy process because in order for you to amend the Massachusetts Constitution, it actually takes 4 years because you have to go through two legislative cycles. And the legislature has to say yes and yes majority each time for it to then end up on the ballot for the voters to vote on. So the iteration of the campaign that started around 2014, some folks sued. And the ballot, the question got kicked off of the ballot that was supposed to be on the ballot in 2018. So then the campaign restarted again. And now it's going to be on the ballot in 2022. It passed all the hurdles. So it's been a pretty long-standing campaign with ups and downs, but this November is a big time for the campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
your hands.
Yeah, Marie-Frances. So, so it seems like with regards to this rebate, I think what I'm hearing is I'm thinking about asks. Are there any asks that you have of us as individuals or as an org? What could we do with regards to the Fair Share Amendment? And then is there anything that we could do with regards to this tax rebate?
Yeah, in regards to the Fair Share Amendment, I would say anybody that is interested in being connected to the campaign, I'm more than happy to do that. There are canvases that are happening, digital organizing that's happening. Get a lot, there are lots of different ways to get involved, of course. With the 62F issue, there's no real legislative strategy at this point for me to say, like, this is what folks should do, besides just paying attention to what's going on. And we're happy to, reach back out to if there's a moment where we feel like this is a time and this is an approach that's really going to work to make this thing more equitable, or to, yeah. So with the Fair Share, for sure.
Okay. And is that raised up Massachusetts? Is that where?
All
right.
Yeah, and we were just with tonight with C3 organizations that are working on Fair Share, that are working on Yes on 4. The question that's trying to keep the Family and Work Mobility Act driver's licenses for all, because the opposition put a question to try to repeal it on the ballot. So
thank you for that. And I think we have one more question and then we'll have to wrap up. Louise asks, what about mass flat tax rate? I don't know if we got to that one.
Yeah, so the income tax in Massachusetts is a flat tax. So essentially, people say like, oh, that's fair because it's 5% and everybody pays it. But the real life impacts of it are that it is actually inequitable, especially when you stack other taxes like the sales tax, like gas taxes on top of it that people of color and lower income people pay disproportionately. But the Fair Share Amendment is sort of the answer to trying to make that tax more equitable, because it would be an extra 4% on income over $1 million.
Yeah.
I kind of feel it shouldn't be. I mean, you tax the rich, but like I think I buy unhealthy snacks, and there are a few things that I could cut down to pay a little bit more taxes. And they say, like a lot of states have progressive tax, not a flat tax, because 5% of a low income tax leaves a lot less. 5% of upper income tax, they have a lot more left than a lower income tax person. And they also say the lottery, especially a scratch ticket, is a tax on the poor.
Yeah, and also sometimes this isn't included in the conversation, but fees and fines also hit poor people and people of color disproportionately too. And that's part of the equation. Transit fees, fees and fines that are related to the, criminal legal system, all that kind of stuff. So lots of different types of taxes and fines and fees that hit us.
Well, on that note,
Mhm.
fortunately, we have to close our session. But thank you so much, Marie.
Oh, the time flew by. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Marie-Frances, for joining us. I feel like we all learned a lot. We're actually going to transition, so we're going to say goodbye to YouTube. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it, and you'll have a good night.